my pleasure to introduce to you today's speaker. I had an opportunity to have breakfast with Stoli today, and it's just really interesting to meet a man that spent 25 plus years in the military for our freedom, you guys. And jet fighter pilot, I understand. He's got 4 kids, married, and raising 3 girls. And I said, what's raising 3 girls like? And he's kind of like Mach 1 and 16. I didn't really say that, did I? But very interesting. My father was in the military. He was a jet fighter pilot. He gave his life for this country. And so it was just very interesting to be able to share with him. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Doug Stoli Nikolai.
It's good, very good to be here today. And I got some special guests in the audience. I got a group of cousins here, some good friends from Eau Claire, and I noticed a lot of veterans in the audience. So thanks for that support. I spoke down at La Crosse Leading with Power about 6 to 9 months ago, and they liked my presentation so much that they recommended it to Keith, and Keith gave me a call, and here I am. So there's absolutely no pressure on me to top that performance today. So, and then not only will I talk about my presentation here, Habits of Honor, Faith, and Patriotism, but also give a personal testimonial to faith-based groups like y'all. And I hope you get something out of that too. All right, so to get things started, as you heard, I'm Stoli Nikolai. I'm a retired Air Force colonel, fighter pilot, and I also like to think of myself as an American patriot at heart. Now, I was born and raised just down the road in Marshfield with a dream, like most of you had growing up, right? Everyone has a different dream. My dream was to become a fighter pilot since around 2nd grade or so. So then after I graduated from the Air Force Academy, I completed pilot training. So I said I realized that dream of mine when I received an F-16 fighter aircraft. Now my Air Force career took me all around the globe. Europe, the Middle East, the Far East, and tours right back here in the good old US of A. Now I had never had a bad assignment, but some of my deployments were what we like to call USA appreciation tours, if you know what I mean. Yeah. One of those places was Iraq, where you never knew when or where the next mortar was going to fall. Now, I'm also a combat veteran. I know what it's like to raise my right hand and promise to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I have felt the adrenaline rush of hostile fire after getting shot at in the skies over Iraq. And I've had too many buddies make the ultimate sacrifice. And that oath I swore, well, that oath is still right here inside me today. And I am proud to be an American and want you all to feel that same pride too. So my goal today is to inspire you all to develop some new habits, specifically habits of honor, faith, and patriotism. You see, when you put these 4 words together, habits, honor, faith, patriotism, you get a fantastic recipe for trust, inspiration, and greatness. So for the next 30 minutes or so, I plan to rekindle your patriotism for our great nation. I want to remind you that your honor and faith still have a place in today's world. And I want to encourage you all to develop some new habits to help rebuild America. So if my talk today goes as planned, I'm going to insert a sliver of honor and faith in your brain. Just as a sliver in your finger is impossible to ignore, the sliver I insert today will help you recognize when your faith is challenged and your honor is on the line. Now, I'm also going to plant a seed of patriotism in your hearts. This heartfelt sense of patriotism will provide the courage to take a stand when necessary and the motivation to make a difference on multiple levels. And now, hey, let's go plant that seed of patriotism by taking a journey back in time and grow some inspiration with a band of true American patriots. All right, trivia time, Star-Spangled Banner edition. First question's pretty easy. Who wrote the Star-Spangled Banner? That's right, Francis Scott Key. Now, what you may not know about Francis Scott Key was that he was a young lawyer at the time, stationed out on a British vessel during the attack where he was negotiating the release of an American POW. So you see, he had a great observation to record the events of that day and a great perspective to feel that raw emotion surrounding that battle. All right, the second question is a little tougher. What was the name of the battle surrounding the Star-Spangled Banner? It was the Battle of... Close. Fort what? Fort McHenry. That's right. All right, Fort McHenry was a small outpost located across the river from the city of Baltimore, which happened to be the second busiest port in the U.S. at the time. Now, as you may recall from your high school history lessons, or not, all right, that the War of 1812 wasn't going real well for us Americans at the time, right? Just 3 weeks earlier, the British had invaded Washington, D.C., and burned parts of our nation's capital and White House to the ground. So you see, if Fort McHenry would have fallen and Baltimore would have been invaded, the War of 1812 may have had a different outcome. So instead of this great American meal we just had here this afternoon, how does a spot of tea and crumpet sound served by Mary Poppins, huh? Pretty good? Well, it only gets better from here, so hang on. All right. Well, let me ask you this. Do you get inspired when you see the American flag waving in the breeze? Yeah, I sure do. And if you're like me, it's probably been a while since you reflected on the depth and meaning of this iconic song. So for the next few minutes, just imagine that you're standing right next to Francis Scott Key during that British attack. Or for an even more intimate experience, envision yourself actually inside Fort McHenry under the rocket's red glare. And now the banner, in the words of Dr. Michael T. George. Hey, Scott, it worked. All right, thanks. It was no ordinary Saturday as the major looked out from his post and spied enemy vessels coming up the river that surrounded Fort McHenry. His intuition whispered to him that they're about to come under attack. And on Tuesday morning, his worst fears became reality. Shelling began by those British warships stationed out in the river, and orders were immediately given to open up return fire. But sadly, we were outgunned, and all our shots fell short. The men felt hopeless as a heavy rain began to fall. Now, sensing the despair and confusion, the British moved 3 of their warships in closer, planning to take control. The situation was truly desperate, so the men did not shirk their responsibilities. Shot after shot sprang forth as cannons erupted with the sound of American defense. And in a span of 30 minutes, those British warships were forced to retreat back out of range. But the major he truly knew that the battle was far from over. Sure enough, the British continued pounding Fort McHenry throughout the evening and into the night. And over 8 hours, the sky was ablaze with rockets and cannons filling the air. But the enemy? Well, the mighty British Navy had not realized its goal. The country had been saved by this united band of brothers. Later that morning, the commander of Fort McHenry gave the order to fire a single cannon. Boom! As a small, battered storm flag was slowly lowering. And a massive garrison flag was quickly raised above the ramparts for all the world to see. Off in the distance, on a small British vessel, a young man saw that glorious flag and, moved with emotion, wrote these words. On the shore dimly seen through the midst of the deep, where the foe's haughty host in dread silence reposes, what is that which the breeze over the towering steep, as it fitfully blows, half conceals, half discloses? Now it catches the gleam of the morning's first beam, in full glory reflected now shines upon the stream. 'Tis the Star-Spangled Banner. Oh, long may it wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. These words, the words you now see in front of you, reminded the country that freedom has a cost. And every day, somewhere in America, people honor those brave men. In fact, we the people honor all the men and women who have served when we stand place our hands over our heart, and we proudly sing the poem of Francis Scott Key. When you stop to think about it, you realize that the words, "we the people," are not just a catchy phrase. They are the story of our republic. And our founders' viewpoint of the Constitution was framed by the Magna Carta, which stands on the premise that our rights are inherent as a people. They're blessings from God, right? Yeah. They're not given us by government or bestowed upon us by some king. And like our founding fathers, we should all strive to live a life of honor bolstered by faith. Now here's a quick story about one of our founding fathers who did exactly that. On May 25th, 1787, freshly sped dirt covered the cobblestones out in front of the Pennsylvania State House, protecting those inside from the sounds of horse-drawn carts and carriages. And Robert Morris of Pennsylvania, the financier of the American Revolution, opened the proceedings with an announcement. General George Washington for the presidency of the Constitutional Convention. The vote was unanimous. But now let me tell you the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say. Washington's decision to attend had been an agonizing one. He was suffering from rheumatism, despondent over the death of a brother. He was consumed by the day-to-day operations up at Mount Vernon. And he was doubting whether his presence would actually make a difference. George Washington, the first president of our great nation, began to lose his faith and almost didn't make that trip. Torn between the hazards of lending his reputation to a gathering perhaps doomed to failure on one hand and the off chance that his presence would actually make a difference on the other, the general finally decided to make that trip. George Washington, the first president of our great nation, took a stand and regained his faith. And the rest, they say, is history. Out of the 55 delegates in attendance, they all rallied around a single person, a true patriot, and a man of unquestionable personal integrity. And when one has such a reputation, such habits of honor, faith, and patriotism, well, it opens the door to trust, inspiration, and greatness. And now let's take a quick deep dive to see how that honor and faith translates in today's world. Here's old George. So, just how does one live an honorable life? Well, first of all, you must have awareness. Where have we heard that word before? Remember that sliver I'm putting in your brain? Yeah, right? You must live in the moment and realize that the situation is one of honor, and then make a conscious decision to keep your word. Next, you must have a high level of competence and a high degree of confidence, and most importantly, possess the dedication and commitment to not only talk the talk, but you guessed it, have the faith, there's a sliver, to walk the walk. And finally, don't set yourself up for failure. Don't make promises you can't keep, especially to my 4 kids, because I'll tell you what, they don't ever forget a thing, you know what I mean? Oof. Now, if there's one thing I've learned after being in the Air Force for 26 years and flying fighters, is that the best way to ingrain a new skill set or to start a successful venture is by learning and reflecting upon your own mistakes. Right? And the second best way, which is usually less expensive and a whole lot less embarrassing, right, is to learn from and listen to the testimonials of others. So in that spirit, let me tell you about a time when I set myself up for failure. Back in 2009, my family and I were in Germany, where I was the commander of the 22nd Fighter Squadron. Now, we were a couple days away from deploying to Iraq, and our higher headquarters, our wing, decided to hold a big farewell party for my 250 maintainers, my 40 to 50 ops personnel, and all their families on a huge hangar-on base. But before we started burning the brats and burgers and tapping the kegs, my leadership team and I put together a series of briefings to make sure everyone's on the same page, and most importantly, that our loved ones were well taken care of while we're away. Now, as the commander, I had the distinct privilege of saying a few words to that large group. So in the morning, I took an opportunity to jot some thoughts down on a little note card, right? And as I walked out into that big hangar floor, I could feel 1,000 sets of eyes following my every move. And my speech seemed to go pretty well, right? But then, as I was finishing things up, I got this overwhelming urge to make a promise, which surprised me because there was no promise on my note card, right? Verify that right there? Yeah, no promise. All right. And before I could even second guess myself, I heard myself saying, I promise to bring all your loved ones home alive and in one piece. Yeah, it certainly felt like the right thing to say at the time. However, a couple days later, when our jets touched down at Balad Air Base just north of Baghdad, it became readily apparent I may have made a promise I couldn't keep. Remember those mortars I talked about earlier? You never knew when or where they're going to fall? Well, sure enough, less than 24 hours after our arrival, we're sprinting for the bunkers as mortars rained down upon us by the surrounding desert countryside. Now, the first 3 to 4 months of our deployment went extremely well. We were flying sorties in support of Operation IRAQI Freedom. We were carrying 500-pound GPS-guided weapons. We would strap on night vision goggles when the sun set and the desert got surrounded by darkness. And then, on occasion, we'd roll in from 10 to 15,000 feet with one squeeze of the trigger, send 100 bullets a second hurling at our enemies in support of our special ops forces on the ground. But then one night, I got the call that I've been dreading since our arrival. After a midnight mortar attack, my maintenance officer was on the phone in a quivering voice. He said, "Sir, we just got hit by a mortar right in the middle of our maintenance compound and things don't look good." And with that, the line went dead. So believe you me, I was saying prayers faster than I had my car going across that flight line that night. And when I got to the scene, he was right, things didn't look good. Through the smoke and the haze of the explosion and the blue flashing lights of the first responder vehicles, I could see a huge crater in the middle of that tarmac. And a couple of our 2-ton cement T-barriers that protected our aircraft just lay in ruins. Now, I don't remember much of that from that night, but what I do remember is when my first sergeant came out of the darkness to give me a sit rep, a situation report. And as his face came into focus, I could see it was just covered in grime and soot and dust from the desert. And when he started giving me that sit rep, a big tear came out of the corner of his eye and carved a groove through that grime on his face. And the next thing I remember is when he finished his sit rep, he looked me in the eye and he said, "Sir, everyone is alive in one piece." Whew. So you can imagine the relief I felt hearing those words, right? So we spent the rest of the night coordinating cleanup efforts. We got our flight operations back online. I went around to each and every one of my airmen, looked them all in the eye to make sure they were okay. As I drove back in the wee hours of the morning back to my room, I reflected on the lesson that I learned that night. Now, the next time you all have to make a promise, thank our Lord above that life or death is not on the line, right? But when you do make a promise, always keep your word, right? Because when you do, people will notice and they will remember, right? And that is a habit you want to be known for. So in the end, when you lead a life of honor bolstered by faith, you gain the trust and confidence of others, right? That enables you to build up that network that enables you to get out there and make a difference. Back in the 1960s, John F. Kennedy inspired the nation to literally reach for the stars, right? All right, Rich, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Stoli, it wasn't the stars, it was the moon, right? He promised to put a man on the moon. All right, I'll give you that one. But I still think you'll get my point here. During his now famous inaugural address, President Kennedy set expectations by proclaiming, "Ask not what your country can do for you, Ask what you can do for your country. And that's one of my favorite quotes of all time. Why don't you help me say that one again? Ready? Here we go. Ask not what your country can do for you. Well, let me ask you this. How do you think we're doing on this one lately? Yeah. What would President Kennedy think of our nation today? Well, unfortunately, we have allowed our country to forget its history or even rewrite its history. We're letting people demonize those Judeo-Christian values of our founding fathers, and we're becoming mired in a oftentimes self-serving government bureaucracy and entitlement society. Is that what President Kennedy envisioned when he said those now famous words? And after I read them again and again and again, I just can't imagine so. And that's why you, as faith-based men here in the Chippewa Falls area, are so vitally important to our nation today. Because it takes commitment, it takes dedication to make a difference, right? It takes faith to improve the life of another. To make your community, your state, our nation a better place. So don't sit around waiting and hoping for someone else to make a difference. Get involved, right? Follow your passion. And then take a page out of Mother Teresa's playbook. Go ahead and cast your own stone. And then watch the impact of your actions ripple throughout the entire community. And when you're done throwing that rock of your own, you may be able to cast a stone on my behalf by thanking or supporting a veteran. Today, far less than 0.1, that's right, 0.1% of our country's population is currently serving in our nation's phenomenal military. These men and women adhere to the solemn creed of no one left behind. They have answered our nation's call. And in doing so, have taken the first step on the long road to the life of true honor. But as the case was with most journeys, oftentimes their march is interrupted by life's unexpected events or detoured by injury. And in those cases, some of our nation's heroes, our country's heroes, discover that the challenges they now face in the real world are just as daunting as those obstacles they once faced on the battlefield. I see them in wheelchairs, broken by their acts of service, yet still waving the American flag. Each and every one of them is so proud to be an American. Their sacrifice is measured in steps they will never take. Now, the good news is that most of today's veterans possess the latest technical skills. They have years of experience planning, setting goals, communicating, and motivating others that no business school can teach. And to top it off, many U.S. companies are currently partnering with veteran-focused nonprofits to minimize those heroes that fall through the cracks. So please, leave no one behind. Don't you all be left behind. Become a hero by supporting or thanking a hero. Amen. All right. Conventional wisdom seems to say that a single person can truly not make a difference in the world today. But I beg to differ. After having this conversation all over our great nation, I have seen how individuals are truly making a difference in their communities and beyond. And you here today, in the Eau Claire region, you men who are leaders and fathers, husbands and friends, are all empowered to have that same impact. That's a wonderful blessing to have, is it not? Now, according to the latest statistics from the National Institute of Charitable Organizations, last year, Americans donated over $478 billion, making the U.S. of A. the most generous nation on the planet. Think about that for a second. Our generosity is just one of the many virtues that define American exceptionalism. The belief that the U.S. is an extraordinary country with a special role to play in the world today. And our civic duty? Well, our civic duty and your faith-based service focus makes us all part of that supporting cast. As Abraham Lincoln stated in his 1863 Gettysburg Address, All Americans have the duty to see that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Did I mention that of that $478 billion donated last year, the majority was given by individuals? That's right, individuals just like you and me. And when you combine that treasure with our time and talents, these tiny, tiny drips of kindness become a multiple of drops, a virtual downpour, a whirlwind of goodwill, charity, and compassion. And when those drops, your drops, hit the ocean of America, well, their ripples begin to build upon each other, to get bigger and larger and more powerful, and put us on the road to rebuilding the shining city on a hill. Let me leave you with one final look back, this time in a more recent history. After 2 terms in office, President Ronald Reagan gave his inaugural farewell address to the nation, and he prominently mentioned the shining city on a hill. This image symbolizes what America means to most of the world. It's the reason that so many people dream of coming to its shores. Now, I doubt if many of us here today remember much of his speech, but his words are still so powerful today. They motivate me to want to rebuild that shining city. They can inspire us all to rebuild America. I've spoken of the shining city all my political life, but I don't recall if I ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. But in my mind, it was a tall, proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, wind-swept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace. A city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be walls, well, then the walls had doors, and the doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart to get here. That's how I saw it, and I see it still. And how stands that city on this winter's night? Well, more prosperous, more secure, and happier than it was 8 years ago. But more than that, after 200 years, 2 centuries, it still stands strong and true on that granite ridge. And her glow has remained steady no matter what storm. She's still a beacon, still a magnet for all who must have freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, as you leave here this afternoon, please remember President Reagan's words. Let them inspire you. Let them restore your patriotism for our great nation. And imagine the possibilities of inspiring the next generation. As he described that shining city, keep it in your mind's eye. See it begin to appear from behind dark clouds like Francis Scott Key's banner, emerging from the smoke and the fog to catch the gleam of the morning's first beam. All right, as I wrap the first part of my program up today, I just want to say thank you for your time, your attention. Keith and Rich, for your wonderful hospitality, and for all your dedication and commitment to leading with power. I hope you feel that sliver in your brain and that seed sprouting in your heart as those habits of honor, faith, and patriotism begin to take root or become more firmly entrenched in your daily lives. And now I leave you with President Reagan's final words upon leaving office. My friends, we did it. We weren't just marking time, we made a difference. We made the city stronger, we made the city freer. And we left her in good hands. All in all, not bad. Not bad at all. And so, goodbye. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America. Thank you very much. All right, so that's kind of the fun part of my speech. Hopefully it was impactful, and I hope the second part here is even more impactful. So I talked about mistakes, learning from your own mistakes, and then learning from the testimonials of others. So I already gave you one story of my career, but I'm going to relay another story in my personal life that I hope you all can learn from as well. Once I retired, I moved back to Wisconsin, down in La Crosse, working for LHI, and things went all right, but then we decided to move back to D.C. where I got a job working in the F-35 office in the Pentagon again. And the day we had everything on the truck, 23,000 pounds of household goods, my 14-year-old son gets diagnosed with brain cancer. So we pulled everything off the truck and went in a triage, and we spent a few months trying to figure things out. And then the docs told us it was inoperable, radiation wouldn't help, and chemo wouldn't help. And I said, what else you got? And they said, absolutely nothing. And then they asked me, when do you want to start? I was like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. So we looked for other ways to heal my son, spiritually, non-traditional ways, and then we ended up moving to Colorado. We started living out of my brother-in-law's basement. And so Brody was fighting cancer with me and my wife Katie, and my 3 girls were going to school. So long story short, my son was called to heaven about 2 years after he was diagnosed, which was a lot longer than 2 or 3 months that he was given. But let me tell you about Brody. 14-year-old, getting brain cancer, never complained. Being the brave dad, I was like, hey, Brody, man, if I could take that cancer from you, I would in a second. And I would have, but he looked me in the eye and said, no way, Dad, this one's mine. So off he went. Also thing he said, I said, bro, what do you think of this? He goes, I don't know why God gave me brain cancer, or even if he did, but it's for a purpose. So Brody started a prayer list. He said, if I'm going to be this close to God, he's going to listen to me. So he had this leather-bound book, started putting names in it, and then when we got to church, he prayed for me, he put a cross next to their names. Well, about a year ago, my wife and I found his book. We looked at the names. There's about 100 or so names in that darn book. And every one of them is still alive today. So God must have been listening. Another story is a good buddy of mine. We went to a healing service every Tuesday night. We'd line up chairs in front of the altar. We'd come up and lay hands on each other and pray. And a good buddy of mine was up there and sitting next to Brody. He was pretty down on himself. His marriage broke up. His kids weren't talking to him. Feeling sorry for himself. So he went up there. He revealed to me later he was thinking about killing himself. Then he felt Brody's hand on his leg. It kind of shocked him. He thought, here this kid's dying of cancer, and he's praying for me. So my friend got his act together. He's still with us today, and he's back with his wife and family. So as a fighter pilot, when you go through a sortie or something big in your life, you kind of think about it and you kind of tease out lessons learned, right? So you can do things better next time or pass lessons along to other people. So a couple lessons I pulled out real quick for you all is when a friend of yours is in a tough situation, it's not time to disappear, right? That's what leading with power is about, right? Your friends left and right of you, they're there to help you up, pick you up. So I know it's awkward, right? When someone's in a bad situation, you don't know what to say, what to do. You don't have to do much. Just let them know you're there, right? Give them a call every once in a while, or just listen, right? It's not that tough. But it is uncomfortable. Now here's a funny story. So after Brody got called to heaven, we're at the Celebration of Life, right? We had a couple hundred people there, and we're in this receiving line. And my wife, she's got a pretty bold personality, to say the least. And we're kind of in a pregame huddle, and she says, if anybody says something dumb, I'm going to really string them up. I'm going to have it. I'm like, oh boy, that's all we need, right? And I said, well, give me some examples. She's like, well, people keep saying Brody's in a better place, right? And yes, we truly believe he is in a better place. But we are all selfish, right? I know I am. I'd take him back from heaven in a heartbeat, which is unfair to him. And my wife said, if someone says he's in a better place, I'm going to say, bring your kid up here because we're about to trade places. And I was like, oh boy, don't say that. So on the receiving line, I'm on the first, meeting all the people coming through. My wife's on the other end. So as it comes through, and at the end, she goes, oh my gosh, no one said anything dumb to me. And I said, well, they sure said a lot of dumb things to me, but I was the filter, and I passed it down. So no one got killed at my son's celebration of life. Now, giving you these lessons, I'm not holier than thou, right? You know, when you go through a rough spot, all right, you try to look for purpose. You know, the question is, why, right? Well, I figured out God doesn't always tell you the reason, but you still got to trust him. And one of the things I learned is when you go through a tough spot, I would call it, you become a member of a club, right? So my brother committed suicide about 30 years ago, and you become that suicide survivor club. And it's amazing when people hear that your brother committed suicide, how many people come forward and say, yeah, I had a loved one who committed suicide too. And it gives you the opportunity to bond with them, support each other, and move forward. So now that I'm a club of a parent who lost a son, a child, people come up to me again, and you can help them through the tough situations. And that kind of brings me to the wrap-up point. So faith and tragedy. Like I said, you know, why do bad things happen to good people? Well, you could argue that there's not very many good people in the world, right? We're all sinners. So the question, maybe why do good things happen to us bad people, is maybe the correct perspective you want to use. Now there's one question I do with the struggle with the miracle. People say, hey, Brody affected so many lives around the world. We had tens of thousands of people praying for Brody because being in the Air Force, we were stationed all over the world. So no kidding. We had people, sisters from Italy praying for us, Vatican praying for us. We had people in Germany. We had people in Alaska. I mean, it was prayers up to heaven. But I still ask, well, if he affected that many people through his suffering and through his perseverance and faith, how many more people would he have affected if he would have been cured? It's one of the questions I probably won't get an answer to until I'm up there with Brody. So here's the last quick story. So my wife has a gift of discernment, right? She can hear the Holy Spirit. She can look at you and figure out who you are in a heartbeat. I'm the typical male. I need a 2x4 coming over the top of my head to figure something out, right? So after Brody died, I was working out in DC still, and I'm going out for a run, and I call it my Forrest Gump moment. So you guys remember who Lieutenant Dan is? He was on that boat in the hurricane, cursing at God. Well, I went out for a run at a national park, so I started running, and there's a thunderstorm coming in. I was like, I can beat that. But I take a wrong turn. My 3-mile run turns into a 6-mile run. So now I'm stuck. Thunderstorm rolls in. So it's just like Lieutenant Dan. I'm in the middle of the thunderstorm. I'm yelling at God. I'm saying, you owe me an answer, right? talk to me. And then, as I was cresting the hill, the air got still, hair in my arms started coming up, and I was like, oh my gosh, God's going to talk to me. And he sure did. A lightning bolt came down and almost took me out. I mean, when you can feel the heat of a lightning bolt strike, and when the sound drops you to your knees, you know it's pretty close. So like I said, he hit me over the head with a 2x4 in the form of a lightning bolt that day, and I said, okay, I get it. We are not God. I am not God. And, you know, he's got 360, full view, all time and space, and guess what we have? We have a little soda straw, right? Looking through the world, but we don't get the total picture. So that's why we're here. Have faith, trust in God, and believe. And I choose to believe. So thank you.